We are just at 1 o'clock Eastern, so I want to go ahead and get us started because we do have a shortened session today. My name is Tessa Barron. I am our Disaster Preparedness Program Associate at SVP, and thanks so much for joining us. We're going to be spending the next 30 minutes talking about some quick tips to get us prepared for hurricane season. So we're about 2 weeks out, and so we wanted to spend some time with you all today to cover some entry points and, again, some quick tips and things that we might not have considered just yet to make sure that we're staying safe and protected as we approach the upcoming hurricane season. So a couple housekeeping items. First is that this webinar is going to get recorded today. So if anyone does it to jump early, I'm going to be following up with a couple of resources that I'm going to talk about today, a survey that I'll get to with some exciting news and the recordings. So I will be sending that again afterwards if you do have to jump. And then we'll get to it in just a moment here, but I am going to share a survey with folks at the end of the presentation, and then again, I'll follow up with it. We have exciting news. We're going to be raffling a generator for everyone that will take a moment to take the survey. And so more on that in just a moment here, but I wanted to preview that for folks. It's a very exciting thing that we're able to offer today. So going ahead and jumping in, I'm just going to spend a moment here giving a little background on SVP. So we are a disaster resilience and recovery organization, and we got our start about 2 decades ago at this point after Hurricane Katrina. So in our early days, we were a rebuild organization, rebuilding homes back to safe, sanitary, and secure conditions and getting people and families back to safety. But in the past 2 decades, our top leadership recognized, well, if our main mission really is to shrink the time between disaster and recovery, we have to be proactive and we have to get folks thinking about preparedness long before a couple weeks prior to disaster season. And so, as you could see here, we've expanded into 5 different program areas. The bulk of our work, I will still say, is in the rebuild space. So we do certainly still do that. But we've now grown to cover the entire disaster spectrum. And so that way, you could see right smack in the middle here, if you could see my mouse, preparedness is one of our main focus areas. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. In our Prepare program, we understand that knowledge is power. And so really our main goal is to try to equip as many different audience sets as possible with knowledge, tools, information, and resources so we can get folks the information they need to make informed disaster preparedness decisions. So ultimately what we're trying to do is build toward communities that are resilient. We're wanting to build toward a culture of preparedness. And one important key facet of that is getting folks to think about and engage with disaster preparedness all throughout the year. So in blue skies planning when disasters aren't on the horizon and all throughout the disaster spectrum. So I'm just going to go over this very briefly here, but like I said, our main goal is to get in front of as many different audience sets as possible. So like households, homeowners, and renters like this webinar this afternoon, and also businesses and community leaders and practitioners to share information about how to get prepared and how we can equip ourselves with tools and information that we need, again, to stay safe in the face of incoming storm events. And so this is the exciting news that I had previewed for us when we got started. But we do have a very brief 1-minute survey. It's just about 5, 6, 7 questions. It'll only take about a minute for folks to fill out. And everyone that does take a moment to complete the survey is going to get entered into a raffle to win a generator. This generator was donated by EcoFlow. It's a partner of ours at SVP, and they were very generous enough to offer us this generator for us to raffle out to folks. And we will ask that if you do want to participate, that you do complete the survey by Friday morning. That is when I'll be going ahead and picking and notifying the winner. And then we will talk about getting that generator raffle prize sent your way. So again, I'll be sending it. We have a QR code at the end of the presentation, and I'll be following up via email with the survey link, but a very, very wonderful thing that we're able to offer because of EcoFlow, and we're very appreciative of them for providing this for us. Okay, so getting into the content here. So we're going to be covering 3 key actions to get ourselves prepared and again, to equip us with the information that we need as we approach hurricane season. So we're going to start with knowing our risks, and we always start here. But before I get into that content bucket, I just wanted to share a brief story to help ground, why it's so important for us to get prepared for disasters and to think about this in advance. And this is a story of Bill and his wife, Sophia, and they were actually a past client of ours at SBP. And Bill and his wife live in Naples, Florida, and they unfortunately had gotten pretty heavily impacted from Hurricane Ian. And, speaking with Bill throughout the process of working with him and his wife, he shared with us that during Hurricane Irma, they really actually ended up not facing very severe impacts. And so by the time that warnings for Hurricane Ian came around, they didn't expect that they were going to need to engage in preparedness actions and evacuation measures and things of that nature. They thought they would be okay because they were okay with the previous storm. And unfortunately, that was not the case. Bill says, as you can see here, that they didn't plan on losing power at all, let alone as quickly as they did. And unfortunately, once a storm comes, you have no idea. You're at the mercy of the storm. You're just out of control. And so it really is, your safety is contingent upon how well you prepared in advance. And so I wanted to share this story because Bill is very adamant about the fact that, moving forward, he's going to take weather alerts much more seriously. He's not going to rely on an event of the past and how well his family might have fared during, again, a previous storm event. And again, he's going to take evacuation recommendations seriously and to stay tuned to emergency alerts and things of that nature. So he's aware of incoming storms and so he can evacuate to safety if that's what's recommended. We're going to talk a little bit about losing power because that can happen with any type of storm event. But that's one thing that Bill had spoken about very frequently is that, again, he didn't expect to lose power. And so he wasn't prepared. So that's one of the main areas that we're going to be focusing on at the latter half of the presentation today. And then this idea of how important it is to communicate. We want to make sure that we have strong lines of communication. We know how to get in touch with folks, even if we lose power. So that way we're staying connected with our family and friends and loved ones, and we're able to help folks with whatever, type of support and help that they might need to stay safe during a disaster. So those are some key takeaways from Bill's story. And again, we share this because we want to really ground this conversation of these different actions to get prepared in advance with a story. So moving along to the content here, we're going to start with knowing our risks. And like I said, we always start here. This is our foundation. If we don't know what types of risks we're facing, we don't know how to get sufficiently prepared. So it's a very important starting point. So unfortunately, we're in this period of time that's characterized by these storm events that are more frequent and much more intense than what we've seen in the past. And we can't do anything to stop those disasters. We can't do anything to slow them down. But what we can do is learn as much as we can about our risks so we can stay safe, so we can get prepared, so we can minimize the damages that might come if we otherwise aren't engaging with preparedness beforehand. And our top recommendation on SBP to get prepared in advance is a tool called riskfactor.com. And as I explain this tool and walk through how it works, I encourage you to whip out your phone and use it and see just how easy it is to get on that site and to use it to your advantage. But anyways, this is a really wonderful tool that was created by the First Straight Foundation. And what you can do is type in your zip code or even your address, and you'll get your personalized risk scores. And so what it'll look like is you'll get a score from 1 to 10 on your specific individualized level of risk to flooding, wildfire, extreme heat, and extreme wind. So it's a really comprehensive tool that offers households a really nice look at, what I might be facing when it comes to these different types of hazard events, and then how I can get prepared so I'm not impacted by them. So that's our top recommendation on SBP. To understand your risks and to engage in different preparedness actions. Let's start with knowing what our risks are, and it starts with using riskfactor.com. And so before we get further into the content here, I wanted to start with a little Hurricane 101 to cover the basics and make sure that we're all on the same page. So when we're talking about hurricanes, what we're thinking about are these violent wind storms that form over tropical and subtropical waters. Like I mentioned before, we're just about at hurricane season, a few weeks out. And so we see these from early summer to late fall. So again, we're right there. The areas around the country that are most heavily impacted by hurricanes are coastal areas, Gulf Coast regions, Atlantic Coast, and we see pretty pervasive and damaging impacts. So heavy rains, damaging winds, storm surges that often lead to flooding. So this is a session today on hurricane and flooding preparedness. And so here's our Hurricane 101, but we see that one of the frequent impacts of hurricanes is flooding. So we often talk about those in a pair. Unfortunately, when it comes to hurricanes and disasters, really just in general, they are unpredictable. So we don't know in advance how long they're going to last. It could be a period of several hours. We could also be looking at a period of several days or longer. So that really speaks to the importance of getting prepared in advance and having what we need, having our basic necessities, our disaster supplies, our medications, having that in advance. Because again, we don't know how long these hurricanes are going to be here. We have a range of how long we could be dealing with them, but really that's it. And we do see with hurricanes that frequently, again, going back to Bill's story, they can cut off electricity. And unfortunately, that does mean cutting off lines of communication. And of course, like many other types of disaster events, they do put adults, sick folks, children, pets, and other types of vulnerable categories of individuals at risk. So it really speaks to the importance of getting prepared, and we're taking the first steps to do that today. So I shared this tool called riskfactor.com a few slides back, and that's a really nifty tool for looking ahead, what types of disasters might we be dealing with. But the other side of the coin there, and it's just as important for us to understand what storms are coming as they're approaching. And so that means getting plugged into information sources so we know what's coming when it's coming. So whether that's your local news apps, your local weather apps, emergency alerts, emergency broadcasts, NOAA's weather radio is another great example. And I emphasize that one because it is battery powered. So if we do lose power, you'd still be able to get plugged into information sources. So this is the other side of the coin here, is understanding what's coming when it's imminent. So for example, if we need to evacuate or if we need to shelter in place, we have enough time to do so and to do so safely. So the last piece here of knowing our risks, and remember that's the first of 3 actions that we're going to cover today, is getting a general understanding of the terminology. Now, I'm not going to go through this word for word, but what we can see here, and as most of you are probably aware, but still important for us to cover, is that hurricanes are categorized by these 5 different categories that we see here. And simply put, as we increase categories, we increase our risk levels. So we see, for example, with category 1, we're dealing with heavy wind that might produce some damage. Well, as we increase category level, again, we're increasing the type of damage that can result from these heavy wind events. So just important for us to understand this terminology in case you come across it and you're not quite sure what it means. This correlates to the type of damage that we can expect to see from an incoming hurricane event. Okay, so we're going to move on to action 2 here, and that's making a preparedness plan. When it comes to preparedness planning, we typically think about this in 4 key buckets, 4 key categories. That's supplies. So we'll look at some basic supplies. We've got a really great checklist. It's PDF printable on our website, so I encourage you to check that out. Communication and information, evacuation, and sheltering. So here is a snippet of the list. Again, we have a larger list on our website, but this highlights some basic necessities that you might need depending on how long, this hurricane season is, and, what storms impact you, and if they leave you sheltering in place at home, and whatever might ensue from this upcoming season. So a couple things to highlight here are it's very critical to have non-perishable food and bottled water. We typically recommend for folks to have between 1 to 3 weeks worth of supplies because again, we just don't know how long these storms could be at our front door. So food and water may be an obvious one, but important to highlight as our number 1 item here. Now, jumping around on our list, other important considerations are medications and medical items. When disasters come, we don't know what could shut down temporarily. So, if we do have any life-saving medications, medical supplies, we need to make sure that we have those on hand. So again, if we're sheltering in place, we have what we need to stay safe. It's as simple as that. Other things to highlight here: flashlights, batteries, battery-powered radios, and batteries. It's a key item there. Again, we want to make sure we're getting plugged into information sources, whether they're emergency alerts and broadcasts that are local or NOAA's weather radio, again, things of that nature. So we're getting the information that we need. That's a key piece here. Then I'm going to highlight the generator item because, again, I just want to emphasize that we do have a really great raffle that we'll be doing at the end of this presentation. And losing power is something that certainly can happen, and it's a key disaster supply item. So you want to make sure that folks are taking advantage of that. So moving along here, I know that sometimes, we see these long lists of disaster items to have, and it can seem a little bit overwhelming. And in some cases, it can certainly seem cost prohibitive. So one thing that we want to encourage folks to do is to take a budget-friendly approach to pulling together your disaster supplies kits. With disaster preparedness, a key theme is planning in advance. And so if we are thinking about disasters and engaging in disaster preparedness actions year round in blue skies, then we can spread out our purchases, maybe take advantage of different holiday sales, different coupons and different things like that could lower the cost of certain items throughout the year. We don't have to get our disaster supplies items all at once if we plan in advance. So that's one that I personally take advantage of, is spreading out those purchases throughout the year. Also, things like visiting cost savings stores or Dollar General, Five Below, and things like that are great resources to take advantage of. You don't need to get brand new items for some of the items on the list. And so for those that you can get secondhand, absolutely take advantage of that and make your kit a little bit more cost friendly. Some states have participate in sales tax holidays, and sales tax holidays, you'll see that they are they're themed. And one of the main themes that states participate in is disaster supplies. And so, I'll share a resource once I follow up when we wrap up today, but that'll help you figure out if you live in a participating state. But if you do live in one, and if they do have a theme of disaster supplies, which again is very common, then that's a great weekend to get your bigger ticket items that might be a little bit more pricey. And then also reaching out to local community organizations. Frequently, organizations will have disaster supplies either discounted or around hurricane season, especially in areas that have high levels of risk. We do work with organizations in the past that we've heard of them, giving supplies out for free. So reaching out to local community organizations, emergency management departments, and just seeing what they have available is a really great starting point in pulling together your kit. Okay, and then the other part of making your preparedness plan that we're going to talk about here is emergency planning. And so these are the actionable pieces. So for the first bullet point here, we talked about emergency supplies, some items that you might need, how to pull that together affordably. Well, the action piece here is, who in your family is going to be in charge of annually checking your disaster supplies kit, seeing if it's stocked, and who's going to be in charge of grabbing any items that might need to be restocked. Next up is making a plan to stay connected to information sources. Okay, well, we talked about some information sources that are important to have downloaded on your phone, but who's going to be in charge of, looking at the weather app and monitoring it every hour and giving the family a verbal update? Practicing your emergency plan, that's a huge one. If we're dealing with any type of changes or additions to the family, maybe it's even just a pet, maybe you've moved, any type of changes need to be incorporated in that family plan. And the action here is to practice the family plan. Unfortunately, disasters are very hectic times. And so we want to make them as predictable as possible. And knowing what we're going to do during an emergency in a disaster is just going to lead to as much predictability as we can hope for in a disaster. Of course, knowing the emergency plan of your employer, maybe you or you have children in school, maybe you're a part of a volunteer group or a community rec league for, softball, whatever that might be. Whatever groups you are a part of, it's important to just take a moment, and that's your actionable piece, is taking a moment to understand and learn what their emergency plans are. If a disaster strikes quickly, we might not know. We can't plan in advance of where we're going to be, so we might not be at home. And so understanding what those emergency plans are of different organizations in our network is a key piece to our safety. And then also this ties in very well with the communication, the importance of communication, talking with our neighbors in advance, understanding if they have any particular needs. Maybe you have an elderly neighbor that isn't very tech savvy, and so they might not be checking emergency alerts, weather apps, and things of that nature. And so you might want to just let them know if a storm is imminent. Or maybe you have a neighbor that has you might need some assistance in evacuating. Knowing those things in advance is just going to help everyone stay connected and stay safe. So moving along here, and we're still talking about preparedness planning. This is our second action still. Recovery planning is something that we actually have a large curriculum built out just on recovery planning because it is a key piece of the puzzle. And when we say recovery planning, we're talking about financial preparedness. We know at SBP that financial preparedness underpins all aspects of recovery, but it's the piece that doesn't get talked about enough. So again, this is just an exploratory look at what we're talking about, what it means to start financially planning for disasters, but we do have a lot of information, other webinars and resources, guides on our website for more information, because again, this is just a snippet of what we talk about. But when we talk about how to financially plan in advance, there are a couple key points that I want to hit on. And the first is making a home inventory. This is something that is quick and easy, but like our common theme of preparing in advance, it does require some forethought. You want to make sure that you're doing this before disasters strike. And so what we mean when we say a home inventory, that really is just as simply as taking pictures and videos of items in your home and of the structure of your home itself and saving those. Maybe you upload those to the iCloud, or maybe you just have an album on your phone to keep these images. So that's what a home inventory is. Next is protecting important documents. And we have checklists online that go through the main categories of important documents and what those documents are themselves. But this is an important piece of the puzzle because having these documents protected and being able to access them post-event is going to expedite the process of putting in an insurance claim or applying for federal aid. So we want to make sure that you have what you need, and you can get the resources to get back on your feet as soon as possible. And having these documents safeguarded is one way to do that. Saving for deductibles and other unexpected costs that might result after disaster is a very important piece. Like we said, disasters are unpredictable, and so we don't know what damages might occur. And so having emergency funds is critical, especially if we're going to be relying on insurance monies to fund any type of disaster damage and repairs. Deductibles are the amount of money that you're going to have to pay out of pocket before you can expect to receive any type of insurance money. And so we want to make sure that if a family is going to rely on insurance, which is our top recommendation, is disaster insurance, that you have the tools in place so you can actually access those funds. And so that is a critical component of disaster insurance. With this theme of disaster insurance, we also want to make sure that families are taking a moment to review their homeowners or renters insurance policies, and just to make sure that you understand what you're paying for and what coverage is included in your policy. Just as importantly, and conversely, getting an understanding of what's not included. And so really understanding any gaps that you might have in your coverage and doing what we can to fill those gaps before disasters strike so you are properly covered should you be impacted from a disaster. And then lastly, leading up, flood insurance, it's our top recommendation at SBP for families to get financially protected in the face of future disasters. And so purchasing flood insurance to fill any gaps that you do identify is going to take you a long way in funding your recovery should you need to rely on any recovery funding sources. Okay, so I know that's a lot, and we're going to move right along here to protecting our home. And so, actions that we take in advance to protect our home are going to go a long way in making sure that our home is protected and in making sure that we're saving money post-event. We have these bucketed into three main categories, and that's regular inspections and maintenance, securing your home, and making property improvements. Now, with inspections and maintenance, a lot of these actions are fairly simple and straightforward. So things like removing dead trees and overhanging limbs, Well, we saw before that with disasters, when we looked at that category slide, we're really dealing with high wind events. And so we want to make sure that we're removing anything that could become a dangerous projectile, overhanging limbs if they get loose from the tree and go into our property, well, that could cause damage, and we want to make sure we're avoiding that. Clearing drains and gutters, another very easy thing to conceptualize. We want to make sure that the flood waters, the rain waters can move away from our property, and so we don't get flooded. But it's just the action of planning in advance to do these actions and to inspect your property to make sure that you have enough time to do these actions. And then lastly, with the roof, this is something that you might want to bring in professional help for, but it's fairly straightforward, inspecting that roof to make sure that it's in good repair. Again, with our theme of planning in advance, we want to make sure that we're giving ourselves enough time for if there are any damages that need to get repaired with our roof or with our drains and gutters or any other part of our home, we have enough time to actually fix those and make those repairs before disasters strike. So that's the main thing here is these actions, again, are very straightforward, but we want to make sure we're doing them in advance and giving ourselves enough time to actually make our repairs should we need to. Quick actions pre-disaster. So this is if we know a storm is approaching, there are easy things that we can do to protect our home from any type of floodwaters that might occur. And so that includes things like laying sandbags near the doorways, moving our valuable items off of the ground floor. With each of these actions, again, despite that they're straightforward in nature, we have this planning in advance piece that's crucial. So we need to make sure we have the sandbags to then grab easily when we know a storm is approaching and lay. We need to make sure that moving the valuable items off of our floor is a part of our emergency plan. Which family member is responsible for moving items off of the floor so we don't have everyone trying to do everything at once, and that just leads to a more hectic event. Putting up storm shutters, again, we need to make sure we have the right storm shutters in advance, but what family member is going to be in charge of putting up those storm shutters? And so the same with all of these, bringing in outdoor items inside, disconnecting electrical appliances. It's just a quick exercise of talking with your family, talking with your roommates, whatever your living situation is, or even if you live alone, just jotting down a plan of action and knowing who's going to do what, so you can, again, make this as predictable as possible. So again, these are quick actions that we can take to secure a property pre-storm. Now, and we're wrapping up quickly here, but it would be remiss of me if I didn't share a couple mitigation options. And that's because mitigation options are the most effective ways to safeguard a property from a disaster event. And remember, today we're talking about hurricanes and flooding. Frequently, mitigation actions do have a little bit of a heftier price tag associated with them. And so that's why I'm offering here some budget-friendly options as a good starting point to start to consider, can I bring any of these actions into my household? Can I implement them if they fit my family's financial picture? So things like replacing carpets with tile, installing hurricane clips, securing your shingles are going to be great protective measures to safeguard your house moving forward. And so certainly things that we want families to consider when you're thinking about how can I best prepare my property and what preventative measures can I take to reduce my risks. Budget-friendly mitigation options are a great place to start. And so lastly, wrapping up here, and we're tying back to Bill's story in the beginning of our session, but power outages, again, can happen with any type of disaster event. And so we want to make sure that pre-storm, we've identified what power source, alternative backup power source you can rely on that's going to meet your family's power needs. In a disaster, I have listed out here a couple actions that we want to make sure that are in the front of our minds so we can stay safe. So unplugging appliances and electronics. Again, having that backup power source at the ready and knowing how to use it safely. These are key items we want to make sure that we're aware of, that we're thinking about. And so that way, when a disaster strikes, we don't have to think about it. We just know how to act. We have our plan in place. And so we're wrapping up here, and I really appreciate you spending the past half an hour with me learning about these different actions. But we talked about knowing your risks. And so that really starts with riskfactor.com and making sure that you have these apps downloaded in advance, your news apps, your weather apps, any type of local systems that are in place to get emergency information broadcasted out. making a preparedness plan. And I know there was a lot that was covered in the preparedness plan section, but we do have a guide on our website that will walk you through every single thing in much more detail than I had time to go into today of, the different actions that are captured in making a preparedness plan. And then protecting your home. What actions can we take in advance to make sure that our home is in good condition? What are the quick actions that we can take when a storm is imminent? And lastly, can we start to consider some mitigation options so we can really make sure that we're reducing the risks moving forward? Okay, and I'll leave this here for a second. And I know we're just at time, but I will stay on a few minutes longer if any folks have questions. And I will be following up. And so you'll have my email address if anything pops up afterwards. But QR code to the survey, if you wouldn't mind, it should just take no longer than 1 minute. If you could go ahead and fill that out, then we'll make sure that you're entered into our raffle. And if you do have a moment to fill that out, please do so by Friday morning and keep an eye out on your email. I will be notifying our winner on Friday morning. And so again, thank you all so much for joining today during your lunch, half an hour, and learning what you can to get prepared as we approach hurricane season. Here is our Prepare program contact information. Please feel free to reach out via email with any questions you have. And any questions at this point, go ahead and throw those in the Q&A box. And I'm happy to talk in more detail about anything we covered today. But if not, thank you again so much for joining. And please be on the lookout for an email from Maya with the resources that we covered, the survey, and the webinar recording. Thanks.